October 12, 1972. Sirens echoed across the fields outside Hollow Ridge, Alabama. Deputies stood beside an abandoned green Pontiac parked near the old railway bridge. The engine was still running. Two purses sat on the front seat. A single ballet flat lay in the mud. The car belonged to Claire and Chloe Addison, 17-year-old twins who had left a homecoming party just hours earlier and never made it home. At first, officers thought it was an accident. Maybe the girls slipped into the river during the storm. But when divers found no trace of them and tire tracks showed another vehicle had stopped there that night, everything changed. For 46 years, Hollow Ridge lived with questions and rumors. No suspects, no bodies, only silence. Then, in 2018, construction workers digging foundations outside town uncovered two sets of remains buried side by side beneath an old farmhouse. The Addison twins had never left Hollow Ridge. And when police finally made an arrest, it wasn't a stranger. It was someone the town had trusted all along. Before we continue, subscribe and stay with me. This story proves that time doesn't erase secrets. It only hides them until someone decides to look. October 12th, 1972 began like any other Friday in Hollow Ridge. The small Alabama town of 3,000 people moved at its usual pace. Kids hurried through the last school bell before the weekend. Store owners locked up early to catch the high school homecoming game. The air smelled like rain, heavy and warm, the kind that rolls in slow before a storm. Claire and Chloe Addison were impossible to miss in a town that small. Identical twins, with dark hair and the same quiet, magnetic presence that drew people in. They were known for their laughter, for singing in church every Sunday, and for never being apart. Claire, the older by 12 minutes, was the responsible one, always watching over her sister. Chloe was wilder, spontaneous, the one who convinced Claire to sneak out to the bonfire after the game. That night, the twins arrived at the high school gym wearing matching white cardigans and red ribbons in their hair. They stayed through the first few dances, smiling in photos taken by classmates. Several people later remembered seeing them leave just after 10:15, saying they planned to stop by a small after-party on the outskirts of town before heading home. By 11, heavy rain began to fall. Most of the partygoers had gone home. A friend, Susan Briggs, told investigators that the twins had called her from a payphone near the train depot around 11:20. They said they were cold and waiting for their father to pick them up. But their father, Harold Addison, later confirmed he never received that call at 11:45. A truck driver passing over the old railway bridge reported seeing a green Pontiac parked on the shoulder with its lights on. He thought it was broken down and didn't stop. That was the last verified sighting of Claire and Chloe Addison alive. When the girls failed to return home, their mother, Ellen, began calling friends, then the sheriff's office. Officers checked the bridge area around 1:30 in the morning and found the car just as the driver had described. The keys were still in the ignition. The engine was running. Rain hammered the roof. Their purses were on the seat, and the radio played softly, cycling through static between stations. Deputies searched the riverbank until sunrise. They found no footprints leading to the water, no signs of a struggle, no personal belongings beyond a single ballet flat lying near the guardrail. The pattern of tire tracks showed that another vehicle had pulled up beside the Pontiac, stayed for several minutes, and then left. By morning, word spread across Hollow Ridge that the Addison twins were missing. Volunteers gathered at the high school parking lot. Farmers brought horses. Neighbors brought flashlights and food. The local radio station interrupted its usual Saturday morning show with an urgent announcement asking anyone who had seen the girls to come forward. Over the next 24 hours, nearly 200 people searched the area surrounding the bridge, the woods, and the nearby fields. Nothing was found. The sheriff at the time, Leonard Myers, told reporters that foul play could not be ruled out. His statement marked the beginning of a search that would consume the town for months. As the days passed, rain washed away what little physical evidence might have remained. The green Pontiac was towed and examined but revealed nothing useful. No fingerprints other than the twins, no blood, no signs of forced entry. It was as if they had simply stepped out of the car and vanished into the storm. In a place like Hollow Ridge, everyone knew everyone. The idea that two teenage girls could disappear without a trace was more than unthinkable. It was impossible. But by the end of that first week, even the most hopeful began to understand that something terrible had happened. The Addison home became the center of the search effort. Flyers were printed and posted on every lamppost and shop window from Hollow Ridge to Montgomery. Their parents kept the porch light burning every night. The light stayed on for 46 years. By sunrise on October 13, 1972, Hollow Ridge was awake. Patrol cars blocked the road to the railway bridge, while volunteers combed the surrounding woods. Reporters from nearby counties began to arrive, drawn by the story of the missing twins. It was the kind of tragedy small towns whispered about for generations, and everyone wanted to believe it would end quickly. Sheriff Leonard Myers, a man better known for breaking up bar fights than leading major investigations, called in help from the Alabama Bureau of Investigation. Detectives set up a temporary command post inside the town hall. Maps of the area were taped to the walls, dotted with red pins marking every sighting, rumor, and search zone. The first 24 hours were chaos. Dozens of people came forward claiming they had seen the Addison twins that night. Some said they spotted the green Pontiac near the river before midnight. Others swore they saw the girls walking along County Road 7 after the storm broke. Most of the leads went nowhere, but each one had to be checked. Deputies began reconstructing the twins' final hours. The last confirmed sighting placed them at the high school homecoming dance. The timeline between 10:15 and 11:45 remained a void. Investigators hoped the payphone call mentioned by their friend, Susan Briggs, would fill that gap, but telephone company records showed no outgoing calls from the depot that night. By the third day, attention shifted to the bridge itself. Divers searched the river again, expanding their perimeter downstream, but no bodies surfaced. A state forensic team analyzed the car and the area around it. The ballet flat found in the mud was confirmed to belong to Claire. The tread pattern on the sole matched one of her other shoes from home. There were no footprints around the car, only the deep imprints left by two vehicles. The second set of tire tracks became the key focus. Investigators determined they came from a truck with worn rear tires and a missing hubcap on the left side. They sent out notices to local repair shops asking if anyone had brought in a vehicle matching that description. Two mechanics recalled working on an old brown Chevrolet pickup owned by a man named Richard Cole, a 28-year-old drifter who sometimes did odd jobs around town. Cole became the first official suspect. Deputies visited his rented trailer on the edge of Hollow Ridge, but he was gone. Neighbors said he had packed up and left early the morning after the twins disappeared. His absence only fueled suspicion. A week later, his truck was found abandoned near the state line, burned beyond recognition. No sign of Cole was ever found. With their prime suspect missing and no physical evidence linking anyone to the scene, the investigation began to stall. Sheriff Myers held daily press briefings, repeating the same line: "We are pursuing all leads." Behind the scenes, the case was slipping through his hands. The community's fear grew with each passing week. Parents stopped letting their children walk to school. The local diner emptied after dark. People whispered about curses, about the river, about the old bridge being haunted. The Addison family, desperate for answers, offered a reward for information. But no one came forward. By November, the media had moved on. The posters in shop windows began to fade. The volunteers returned to their routines. Only Harold and Ellen Addison refused to give up. Every night, they sat by the window of their small white house, waiting for headlights that never appeared. By Christmas, the search was officially scaled back. The case remained open but dormant. The twins' school lockers were cleaned out and turned into a memorial. On graduation day, their classmates placed 2 empty chairs on the gym floor. In the records of the Alabama Bureau of Investigation, the case was filed under one simple heading: Missing Persons. Addison, Claire, and Chloe. Status: unresolved. No one in Hollow Ridge knew it then, but the truth about what happened to the twins was already buried less than 2 miles from that bridge, waiting for someone to find it. Winter came early to Hollow Ridge that year. By December 1972, frost clung to the windows of the Addison home, and the porch light still burned every night. The town that had once been alive with chatter fell quiet. The search had ended, but the silence felt heavier than the storm that had started it all. Harold Addison spent his days walking the fields near the river, carrying the same flashlight he had used during the first night of the search. He would leave before dawn and return after dark, clothes soaked from the mist, eyes fixed on the ground as if the truth might appear if he just kept looking. His wife, Ellen, rarely left the house. She spent her time in the twins' bedroom, folding the same clothes over and over, praying the next knock on the door would be good news. The Addison twins were Hollow Ridge's first tragedy in a generation. Before them, the worst anyone could remember was a barn fire and a few bad car accidents. The idea that 2 teenage girls could vanish without a trace felt impossible. And when something feels impossible, people start creating explanations. Rumors spread through the town like wildfire. Some said the twins had run away with boys from a nearby county. Others claimed they had drowned in the river and been carried away downstream. A few whispered darker things, stories about the old limestone quarry, about men who worked there at night, about strange lights near the bridge after the rain. The sheriff tried to quiet the talk, but the damage was done. Hollow Ridge had lost its sense of safety. Locks appeared on doors that had never been locked before. Teenagers stopped walking home from school. Even Sunday service at the Baptist church began with a prayer for the missing girls. At the high school, their empty desks were left untouched. Students began to avoid that hallway altogether. Teachers tried to carry on, but every classroom felt heavier, as if the air itself was holding its breath. Local businesses felt the change, too. The diner, where the twins used to stop for milkshakes, closed early each evening. The owner, a woman named Louise Turner, told reporters she could no longer bear the sound of the jukebox playing their favorite song. By spring of 1973, a year had nearly passed. The Addison case file sat on the corner of Sheriff Meyer's desk, thick with notes but thin on answers. He had received dozens of new tips, most from people outside the county claiming visions, dreams, or messages from the girls. He followed them all, desperate for something real. None were. The case had become more than an investigation. It was a shadow that touched everything in Hollow Ridge. Weddings were quieter. Birthdays felt forced, and every time it rained, people looked toward the bridge. Harold kept a notebook filled with dates, names, and places. He wrote down every theory, every lead. He spoke to drifters, hunters, fishermen, anyone who might have seen something. He began to study maps of the area, marking circles where he thought the girls might have been taken. Each week the circles spread wider. Ellen withdrew further into her faith. She lit candles for the twins every night, whispering their names until her voice gave out. Friends tried to comfort her, but she no longer wanted comfort. She wanted proof that her daughters were somewhere she could reach. By the 2nd anniversary of their disappearance, the town held a vigil on the bridge. More than 200 people gathered in the cold, holding candles that flickered in the wind. Someone sang Amazing Grace. Others cried silently. When the candles went out, the darkness returned, and Hollow Ridge went back to pretending that life could move on. But grief does not leave quietly. It lingers in the spaces between conversations. It hides behind closed curtains and polite smiles. And in Hollow Ridge, it was everywhere. By the 3rd year after the disappearance, Hollow Ridge had learned to live with its unease. The bridge where the twins were last seen became a landmark of sorrow. Teenagers drove there at night to test their courage, headlights flickering over the guardrail where the ballet flat had been found. For most people, the Addison case was a painful memory. For the sheriff, it was unfinished business that refused to fade. Sheriff Leonard Myers kept a box in his office labeled simply Addison. Inside were photographs of the car, soil samples, witness statements, and a single Polaroid of a man standing beside a brown pickup truck. His name was Richard Cole. Cole had drifted into Hollow Ridge 6 months before the twins vanished. He told people he was a mechanic, though no one ever saw him work. He rented a small trailer behind the feed store and spent most nights at the Lucky Star Tavern on the edge of town. Those who knew him described him as quiet but watchful, a man who drank alone and stared a little too long when the Addison twins walked by after church. When the sheriff first interviewed Cole, he seemed nervous. He said he had been home the night of the disappearance, watching television. His neighbor, an older woman named Irene Porter, confirmed seeing his truck parked outside until after midnight. It was enough to clear him at the time, but when deputies went back to question him again 3 days later, he was gone. The trailer was empty, the bed unmade, clothes still in the dresser, a plate of food half-eaten on the table. On the floor, beneath a pile of newspapers, deputies found a torn page from a local newspaper with the headline, "Twins Still Missing." In the margin, someone had underlined the words, "Last seen near railway bridge." A week later, hunters found his burned-out truck near the state line. No sign of Cole, no body, no proof that he was dead or alive. For years, he remained the ghost in every theory. Some believed he had fled to another state, changed his name, and started over. Others were convinced he was buried somewhere near the river, another secret claimed by Hollow Ridge. By 1975, new crimes and new faces had taken the sheriff's attention. The Addison file grew dusty, but Richard Cole's name never left it. Each time a new investigator reviewed the case, they circled back to him. He was the only person who fit the timeline, the only one with a vehicle that matched the tire tracks, the only one who vanished right after the girls. In 1981, a man matching Cole's description was arrested in Arkansas for assault, but released before his fingerprints could be verified. The trail went cold again. Every few years, rumors surfaced. A letter here, a phone call there. Someone claiming to have seen him in Louisiana, another insisting he was living under a different name in Texas. None of it ever led anywhere. For the Addison family, the name Richard Cole became both hope and curse. Hope, because he was the only lead that made sense. Curse, because he had disappeared so completely that catching him felt impossible. In 1994, Sheriff Myers retired, leaving behind one unfinished note in his personal journal. "If Cole is alive, he knows where the girls are. Find him." He never did. Years passed. The old trailer park was torn down. The bridge was rebuilt. The Lucky Star Tavern closed after a fire. People stopped talking about Richard Cole altogether. But in the spring of 2018, when construction crews unearthed the remains of the Addison twins beneath a collapsed farmhouse, the name that surfaced again in the reports, the one that echoed through every meeting room at the county courthouse, was his. The man who had vanished was back in the center of the story. April 2018 began like any other spring in Hollow Ridge. The fields outside town were alive again, and a new housing development was planned on the old Langford property, a stretch of overgrown farmland that had been abandoned since the late 70s. Bulldozers arrived to clear the land, tearing through vines and brush that had hidden the ruins of an old farmhouse. At 8:45 on a Wednesday morning, a construction worker named Tyler Green noticed something strange in the soil near the foundation. What looked like smooth white stone was sticking out from the clay. He thought it might be animal bones, common on old farmland, but when he knelt down and brushed away more dirt, the shape of a small hand appeared. Work stopped immediately. The sheriff's department sealed off the area, and within hours, crime scene tents dotted the property. Forensic teams from Montgomery arrived before sunset. The Langford farmhouse had once belonged to a quiet couple who left town in 1978. Since then, the land had changed owners several times. No one had lived there for decades. Investigators worked through the night, using floodlights to guide them as they sifted through the dirt. By morning, they uncovered 2 shallow graves positioned side by side. The remains were fragile but clearly human. Near one of the skeletons, a silver bracelet glinted under the light. On the inside was an engraving, C.A. The second skeleton had a similar bracelet marked C.H. Detective Marie Lawson, who led the Cold Case Division for the Alabama Bureau of Investigation, was the first to connect the initials to the Addison twins. She requested dental records and personal effects from the original case file. 2 days later, the comparison came back positive. The Addison girls had finally been found 46 years after they disappeared. The announcement hit Hollow Ridge like a second storm. People who had long buried the memory found themselves reliving it. News vans returned to town. The old bridge was lined with flowers again. For Harold and Ellen Addison, both in their late 70s, the discovery brought neither peace nor relief. It only confirmed what they had feared since the night their daughters vanished. The condition of the remains told a story that no one had been ready to hear. Both girls had suffered head trauma consistent with a blunt object. The fractures indicated they had been struck from behind. The soil surrounding the bodies contained traces of motor oil and lime, materials often used in the 70s to preserve wood or mask odor. Forensic analysis identified the oil as a type once used exclusively in agricultural machinery. Detectives began reviewing property records for the Langford farm. In 1972, the land had been leased temporarily to a local contractor who used it to store equipment. His name was Daniel Crow, a retired shop teacher at Hollow Ridge High School. Crow had lived quietly in town for decades, respected, friendly, known for repairing things for neighbors and mentoring students in auto mechanics. When investigators compared employment records from the old school district with statements from the Addison case, they discovered that Daniel Crow had been teaching at the high school during the time the twins attended. He had supervised the stage crew for the homecoming dance the night they disappeared. Crow had never been questioned. In the original investigation, his name appeared once in passing on a list of volunteers who helped search the riverbank. Nothing more. Now, nearly half a century later, his name sat at the top of a new list. Over the next week, detectives collected soil samples, fibers, and fingerprints from the site. A rusted hammer was recovered from the debris pile near the graves. Under ultraviolet light, faint traces of blood were found in the grooves of the handle. DNA analysis confirmed it matched both twins. The evidence was irrefutable. After 46 years, Hollow Ridge finally had its suspect. When the name Daniel Crow appeared in the case file, it barely caused a ripple at first. He was 79 years old, widowed, and still living in the same pale blue house at the end of Birch Street. His yard was always trimmed, his porch freshly painted. People waved when they passed him in town. Most knew him as Mr. Crow, the kind teacher who had taught generations of students how to fix engines and sharpen tools. In the small town of Hollow Ridge, Daniel Crow was not just respected, he was liked. He had been part of the community for more than 50 years. He coached Little League, served as a deacon at the church, and helped repair the local library's broken heating system every winter. To many, he was the image of decency, but when detectives began to trace his history, that image started to crack. Crow had moved to Hollow Ridge in 1969 after a brief teaching job in Tennessee ended abruptly. The records from that district were sparse, but one notation stood out: resigned pending inquiry. The file did not specify the reason. The Tennessee school where he had worked had since closed, and most of the staff were long gone. Back in Alabama, detectives pulled the employment records from Hollow Ridge High. Crow's classroom sat directly across from the gym where the homecoming dance had taken place the night the Addison twins vanished. He had supervised the setup for the event and signed off on the equipment list the same day. Students from that year were re-interviewed. One former student remembered staying late that evening to help Mr. Crow clean up after the dance. She said he left around 10:30, claiming he needed to return some tools to his truck. That was the same window of time when the Addison twins were last seen. Detectives obtained a warrant to search Crow's property. What they found inside his garage stopped them cold. Hidden behind a false wall was a collection of old tools, boxes of nails, rusted machinery, and one small wooden crate marked shop supplies. Inside the crate lay a stack of faded Polaroids. Most were harmless pictures of students working on school projects, but a few were unsettling. The Addison twins appeared in 2 of them, smiling, unaware the photos had been taken from a distance. In a locked cabinet, investigators found something else: a set of silver bracelets identical to the ones recovered at the burial site. Both had initials carefully scratched inside. When questioned, Crow appeared calm. He denied any involvement, claiming he had kept the bracelets as lost items turned in by students. He said the photographs were part of a class project documenting school events. He told detectives he had no memory of the night in question. His tone remained steady. His hands never shook. But forensic evidence began to close the circle. A partial fingerprint lifted from one of the bracelets matched his. Residue found on the hammer from the burial site contained a trace compound identical to the lubricant Crow used in his classroom during the 70s. Even the soil from the foundation of his garage matched the composition of the dirt where the twins had been buried. The more investigators uncovered, the clearer the pattern became. Crow had known the Addison girls well. He had offered to drive them home from school several times. He had even given them small gifts for helping decorate the gym. To the outside world, it was harmless kindness. To detectives, it was grooming. Neighbors struggled to believe it. Reporters surrounded his house as he was led out in handcuffs, head down, wearing a faded denim jacket and wire-rimmed glasses. The man who had fixed their lawnmowers and taught their children shop class was accused of murdering the Addison twins. For Hollow Ridge, it was unthinkable. But the evidence spoke louder than denial. When the news broke, one resident said what everyone was thinking: if Daniel Crow could do something like that, maybe we never really knew this town at all. The arrest of Daniel Crow took place just after sunrise on May 23, 2018. The quiet streets of Hollow Ridge were still wet from a night of rain. Birds called from the pines as a convoy of black SUVs rolled down Birch Street and stopped in front of his house. Detective Marie Lawson led the operation. She had been with the Alabama Bureau of Investigation for 19 years and had seen her share of difficult arrests. Still, she later admitted that this one felt different. "You could feel the weight of history on the street," she said. Everyone in town had a connection to him. You could see it in their faces as they watched. So, then dusk. Neighbors came out onto their porches in silence. Curtains shifted. Doors cracked open. Crow stepped out of his front door wearing a plaid shirt and work boots. He didn't ask why they were there. He didn't speak at all. When officers placed him in handcuffs, he simply nodded, as if he had been expecting it. He was charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder in the deaths of Claire and Chloe Addison. The sheriff's office announced the arrest at a press conference later that morning. Reporters packed into the small county courthouse, their cameras pointed at a podium draped with the state flag. When Sheriff David Reynolds read the charges aloud, the room fell silent. For Hollow Ridge, it was the moment the past became real again. People who had once called Crow a friend found themselves questioning every memory. Parents who had trusted him with their children stared at old photographs with unease. The church congregation, where he had served for decades, held an emergency meeting that night. Some members wanted to defend him. Others couldn't bear to hear his name. At the Addison home, now aged and faded but still standing, the news spread quietly. Harold and Ellen sat together at the kitchen table, holding hands. After nearly half a century of waiting, they finally had a name, a face, and a reason. But it did not bring the peace they expected. Ellen wept without words. Harold said only one sentence to the reporter who visited later that day. "He ate at our table once." The town changed overnight. News crews from across the country filled Main Street. Satellite vans parked outside the diner that had been empty for years. Strangers drove in from neighboring towns to see the house of the man accused of murdering the Addison twins. The courthouse square became a gathering point for both curiosity and grief. Some people left flowers. Others brought signs demanding the death penalty. A few still defended Crow, insisting that the evidence must be wrong, that the man they knew could not be capable of such a thing. Detectives spent days cataloging items from his home. More Polaroids, handwritten notes about former students, receipts from hardware stores dating back decades. Everything was carefully sealed and logged. Crow's first court appearance was brief. He stood before the judge, frail but expressionless. When asked if he understood the charges, he said yes. When asked if he had anything to say, he shook his head. He was denied bail and transported to the county detention center. Outside the courthouse, the air felt heavy. Reporters shouted questions that no one answered. A woman who had been one of Crow's former students broke down crying near the steps. "He used to fix our bikes," she said. "I can't make sense of it." For the Addison family, the town's sympathy came too late. Decades of unanswered prayers had turned into a reality more painful than silence. They had always imagined monsters in the dark, never the man who lived down the road. That night, the porch light at the Addison home stayed on, just as it had since 1972. Only now it no longer symbolized hope. It was the light of reckoning. The trial of Daniel Crow began on February 3, 2019, in the Lowell County Courthouse. Snow fell lightly outside, turning the courthouse steps white as people lined up hours before the doors opened. Inside, every seat in the gallery was filled. Reporters, former students, townspeople, and a handful of out-of-town visitors who said they wanted to witness justice for the Addison twins. The prosecution was led by District Attorney Karen Yates, a precise, unflinching woman known for her calm intensity in the courtroom. Her opening statement was simple. "This case is about trust," she said. 2 young women trusted a man who should have protected them. Instead, he took their lives and buried their memory for almost half a century. The defense did not dispute that the remains were the Addison twins. Their strategy centered on doubt. They argued that the evidence was too old. that contamination and time made certainty impossible. Crow's attorney, a soft-spoken man from Montgomery, claimed his client had been framed by coincidence and decades of rumor. But as the days passed, the evidence unfolded piece by piece, and the story that emerged was impossible to ignore. Detective Marie Lawson took the stand first. She walked the jury through every discovery, from the bracelets to the Polaroids to the rusted hammer. Photographs were projected on a screen. The courtroom was silent as the images appeared, each one more haunting than the last. Forensic experts followed. They explained how the fingerprints found on one of the bracelets matched Crow's right thumb, how the chemical composition of the oil at the burial site matched the lubricant he used in his classroom, how soil particles recovered from the hem of an old work jacket in his garage were identical to those from the Langford property. Then came the witnesses. Former students described Crow as friendly but controlling. One recalled how he insisted on giving rides home to certain girls, even when they refused. Another remembered seeing the twins talking to him behind the gym the night of the dance. A janitor testified that Crow's brown pickup had been parked near the railway bridge around 11 that same night. The defense tried to discredit the witnesses, calling their memories unreliable after so many years. But the weight of the evidence grew heavier with each testimony. Midway through the trial, the prosecution presented a final piece of evidence that sealed the case. A hidden journal recovered from Crow's attic contained short, cryptic entries from the fall of 1972. One page read only, "Two angels in red ribbons. They trusted me." When that line was read aloud, Ellen Addison left the courtroom in tears. Throughout the proceedings, Crow remained still. He spoke rarely, his eyes fixed on the table in front of him. His lawyer whispered to him often, but Crow gave no reaction. Reporters described his expression as empty, his voice flat. After 12 days of testimony and nearly 5 decades of waiting, the jury deliberated for just 6 hours. On the evening of February 15th, they returned with a unanimous verdict, guilty on both counts of first-degree murder. The courtroom was silent as the judge read the sentence. 2 consecutive life terms without the possibility of parole. The judge's words echoed through the room. Justice delayed is not justice denied. Outside, the crowd that had gathered in the cold applauded quietly. Some cried. Others just stood still. Inside the courthouse, Harold and Ellen Addison sat together, their hands intertwined. After 46 years, they finally had an answer. But as they left through the side door, reporters noticed there was no relief on their faces, only exhaustion. The truth had come out, but it had arrived too late to heal what the years had already taken. When the verdict was announced, the sound inside the courthouse was not cheering. It was quiet weeping. Hollow Ridge had waited almost half a century to hear those words. Yet, when they came, they did not sound like victory. They sounded like the end of something that had defined the town for generations. The following morning, the newspaper headline read, "Justice After 46 Years." Below it was a photograph of the Addison sisters from their high school yearbook. They were smiling, wearing the same red ribbons they had worn the night they vanished. That image hung in every shop window in town for weeks. For the people of Hollow Ridge, the trial changed everything. It forced them to remember what they had spent years trying to forget. Old friends began calling each other again, some to apologize, some to share stories they had never told. The church held a memorial service that filled every pew. People who had doubted the family stood side by side with those who had never stopped believing. But for Harold and Ellen Addison, the days after the trial were the hardest. Reporters left. The crowds faded. Their small house, once filled with visitors and flowers, became silent again. The porch light still burned each night, but now it was no longer a beacon of hope. It was a tribute, Ellen spent her mornings in the garden, planting roses the color of the twins' ribbons. Harold began sorting through boxes of old documents, letters, and photographs, finally able to let some of them go. Their living room walls became a gallery of memory, the story of two girls who had once filled the house with laughter. The town itself began to change. The county board renamed the railway bridge Addison Crossing in honor of the sisters. A plaque was placed near the site of their disappearance. Each October, on the anniversary of that night, candles line the guardrail as people gather in silence. At the high school, a scholarship was created in their names. The first recipient was a young woman who planned to study forensic science. She said she wanted to make sure that no other family would have to wait that long for answers. Detective Marie Lawson received a commendation from the governor for her work on the case. In interviews, she often spoke about the quiet strength of small-town families. People think justice is about arrests and verdicts, she said. But sometimes justice is just giving the truth back to those who lost it. As for Daniel Crowe, he was transferred to the state penitentiary in Montgomery. He never spoke publicly after the trial. He received no visitors, no letters. When he died 2 years later from heart failure, his death barely made the news. His body was cremated, and no one claimed the ashes. For Hollow Ridge, his death brought a final release. The town held no ceremony, no public comment. The name Crowe faded quietly, replaced by the story of the twins whose disappearance had haunted the county for almost half a century. Over time, new families moved into the area. Children grew up hearing fragments of the story. Some knew the details, others only the warning. Don't walk near the bridge after dark. The Addison case became part of local history, a lesson told in classrooms, a story about faith, endurance, and the darkness that can hide behind familiar faces. In the end, Hollow Ridge learned that justice does not erase pain. It only makes room for healing to begin. And in a small house on Maple Avenue, where the porch light still shines every night, that healing is still happening. In the years that followed, the Addison case became more than a local tragedy. It became a lesson. Across Alabama, investigators began reopening old files, inspired by what had happened in Hollow Ridge. The case proved that persistence, memory, and modern technology could reach deeper than time itself. By 2021, the Alabama Bureau of Investigation had created a new cold case division named in honor of Claire and Chloe Addison. Its mission was simple: to revisit unresolved disappearances using modern forensic science and digital archiving. Detective Marie Lawson was appointed as its first director. She often told new recruits that the Addison case was not solved by luck, but by endurance. "Every piece of evidence has a voice," she said. "Sometimes it just takes 40 years for someone to listen." The case also changed how smaller departments across the state handled missing persons. Training programs were introduced to teach rural officers how to preserve evidence and document witness accounts before they fade. Old storage rooms were cleared, boxes re-examined, and forgotten files were digitized. Several long dormant cases began to see movement. Hollow Ridge itself turned its pain into something enduring. The old Langford property, once the site of the burial, was transformed into a memorial garden maintained by volunteers. A stone archway at the entrance reads, "They were found. May others be too." Each spring, schoolchildren plant flowers there as part of a local tradition. The story also reached beyond Alabama. True crime documentaries, university lectures, and law enforcement seminars across the country referenced the Addison case as an example of how long-delayed justice can still matter. Not because of the headlines, but because of the humanity behind them. For Harold and Ellen Addison, the attention was bittersweet. They had never sought fame, only answers. When asked how they felt about the case becoming part of state history, Harold simply said, "If it helps another family, then it means our girls' lives still matter." In 2020, a mural was painted on the side of the Hollow Ridge Community Center. It showed the twins as they were in their final school portrait, holding hands beneath a crimson sky. Beneath the image were 5 words: "Truth does not disappear." The mural became a quiet symbol for the town's rebirth. Visitors left flowers and notes. Some came from families who had lost loved ones in their own unsolved cases. They said the Addison story gave them hope that one day their phone might ring with the same news. For law enforcement, the case also highlighted the power of community memory. Without the persistence of people who refused to forget, the Addison file might have remained in a dusty cabinet forever. In training sessions, investigators now refer to this as the Hollow Ridge Principle. It reminds them that behind every report number is a family still waiting. The lessons of the case reached classrooms too. History teachers in Alabama began using it as part of civic education, showing students how justice can take time, but also how it depends on ordinary people paying attention. Years later, when Ellen Addison passed away peacefully in her sleep, the entire town attended her funeral. On her headstone were engraved the names of her daughters and a simple inscription, "Found at last." Her husband Harold lived one more year, long enough to see the garden in bloom one final time. The town gathered again to honor him, the man who never stopped searching. Today, Hollow Ridge stands quiet once more. The bridge is repaired, the river runs clean, and the porch light on Maple Avenue still burns every night. It is no longer a symbol of waiting. It is a reminder that truth, no matter how deeply buried, always finds its way back to the light. There is a stillness that settles over Hollow Ridge now. The fields are quiet again. The bridge stands strong, its metal beams reflecting the evening Sunday. For those who pass by, it looks like any other small-town crossing. But for the people who remember, it will always be the place where time stopped. Every October, a small group gathers there at dusk. They light candles, place them along the rail, and say the twins' names aloud. No speeches, no cameras. Just light on water and the sound of the wind moving through the trees. The Addison story has become part of Alabama's collective memory. It is taught not for its tragedy, but for what it revealed. That evil can wear a familiar face, that justice can move slowly but surely, and that a family's faith can outlast everything else. Detective Marie Lawson still visits the memorial garden once a year. She never stays long. She says she goes there to remind herself why she does this work. On the day the garden opened, she placed 2 small ribbons, one red and one white, at the base of the stone archway. She never replaced them, but they are still there, faded now, held in place by the wind. For those who knew the twins, life went on in quiet ways. Their classmates grew old, their town changed. New faces replaced the old. Yet every person who lived through that time carries a trace of it, a memory that shapes how they look at strangers, how they lock their doors, how they raise their children. In the end, the Addison case was not just about crime or punishment. It was about memory, about how a community learns to hold both grief and grace in the same hands. The light on Maple Avenue still burns each night. It no longer calls for someone to come home. It simply reminds the town that they were loved, that they mattered, and that truth, however late, will always return. Before we close, remember this: every missing person's story is more than a mystery. It is a promise left unanswered, waiting for someone brave enough to look back. If you are watching this now, take a moment to think of them. Claire and Chloe Addison, 2 girls from a small Alabama town who finally made their way home. Thank you for watching. Subscribe, share their story, and help bring light to the ones still waiting to be found.